Hmm. All right. I believe we are recording and going to use streaming to YouTube now.
Okay. All right. Welcome everybody to the Deer Subcommittee meeting for the City of Wildwood. It is the appointed time. I see Aaron is logging in. Michelle, do we have anyone else?
I believe I'm here. Can you hear me? This is
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes, we can, Aaron.
Okay, super. Thanks.
Welcome. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you.
Awesome. Michelle or Rick, do we see anyone in the queue or in the public?
No, I think we're good to go. I don't have any attendees right now. We have Aaron with us, so.
Perfect. All right, well, I guess we'll get started. Rick, thank you for sending around the draft. Did everyone else get a chance to see it? Yes. All right. Rick, you want to take it away?
I can certainly do that. I believe the first thing on the agenda, if I'm correct, is the item was related to the most recent deer count. So I don't know if everyone had seen that prior. I don't believe we had it at our last meeting. So it's on the agenda for discussion.
Rick and Chair Collier, do you want to do roll call and approval of minutes first?
Yes, sorry.
Not a problem, sir.
Michelle, you want to call the roll?
Sure. We have two subcommittee members. Marshall Scott Collier. Are you present?
Here.
And then also Jeff Baker is another one. Does anyone know if he will be attending today?
He said he might be late.
Yeah, might be
late.
He
might be late. Okay. And then also with us, we have Sergeant Brad Wendling, Captain Jim Mundell, City Administrator Steve Cross, Rick Brown, Director of Public Works, and Aaron Shank, Missouri Department of Conservation Urban Wildlife Biologist.
Okay, great. Next item, approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any suggestions, comments, edits for the minutes? If not, okay, seeing none, we will accept those as presented. Thank you. Next item is the sampling report. So, which I thought the number was not unsurprising, but the actual number did. The fact that it grew didn't surprise me. That it grew that much since the prior event was a bit of a surprise. But, Rick, were you going to speak to that, or Brad?
Honestly, I was going to suggest that Brad may want to speak to that. The police were very instrumental in getting the numbers to us and completing the results. So I figured they'd be the best to talk to it.
All right. Well, it's all pretty simple, and I'll give a real brief analysis here. So we counted in a 30 square mile area, and the result was with a 95% confidence interval that the population is 53 deer per square mile, and the recommended population level by the St. Louis County Deer Task Force in the past was between 15 to 20 deer per square mile. So we're well over double what the high end of the recommended population should be. And I don't know if that's still the current recommendation. Maybe Aaron could comment on that if that's changed at all, but I'm assuming that that's still an accurate recommended population level.
I'm happy to weigh in there regarding that level. And not to muddy the waters right off the bat, but 15 to 20 deer per square mile really reflects what was likely here naturally occurring at their most dense population prior to major European settlement of the area. So our natural communities within this part of North America were evolved essentially with less than 20 deer per square mile. Now, whether or not that's attainable within a suburban community is without significant amount of effort and probably financial contribution, you know, as far as hiring contractors to do culling and whatnot. That's probably unlikely, you know, to try to achieve that just through archery hunting, for instance. But the goal deer density, it's a little bit frustrating because Missouri Department of Conservation doesn't tell you what that is. But I can tell you from my experience, and I've been doing this in St. Louis for 18 years, I can tell you that if you aim for about 40 deer per square mile across the community, you will largely minimize the conflicts with deer while still afford plenty of opportunity to see deer and enjoy deer, and still have opportunities to harvest deer, even though that's above the kind of background ecological density. 40 deer per square mile does seem to be the social kind of carrying capacity, like what people will tolerate and still appreciate deer in the community.
Great.
So I don't
Thank you
know
for that.
I
I think that's a very good perspective.
Yeah, trying to set a goal number of deer seems like it should be more simple than it is, but it has a lot more to do with social tolerance than it does with kind of biological metrics.
Okay. Brad, any other comments on the report?
No, not really. If anybody has any specific questions, I'll try to answer them. I mean, our end of it is pretty user friendly and simple, obviously because the police are capable of doing it. So just driving around and counting the deer and measuring the distances, all the scientific analysis and calculations, that's over my head as far as the all that computation and what the program does. But if anybody has any specific questions, I'll try to get your answers. And if I can't do that, I'll reach out to Sarah and ask for clarifications if I can't answer any questions you have. Steve, yeah.
Please fire away.
Thank you. I just, so in the introduction, it said that the counts with a 95% confidence rate, it's anywhere between 59 and 112, which is a pretty big range, especially if, if we, and then in the conclusion where we're saying, well, it's 53, well below the 53 deer per square mile estimate range at the low end of the 95%. So I guess where I'm going is if Aaron said, hey, 40 is a more reasonable number, 40 deer per square mile. If we're using say 53 or even 59, that's not bad. I mean, some work needs to be done to get maybe to that tolerance level, as Aaron said, of 40. 112, that's way above that number. And so I'm curious, that's a pretty big range, 59 to 112. So if we split the difference, you're looking at, what? So you're looking at 160, 172, you might be looking at an average of about 80 to 85, which is double the 40 that she said. So where we select within that range would make a big difference in terms of how much effort we need to do to get it down to a 40. It would seem.
Aaron can correct me if I'm off base here, but I think that relates to just the natural fluctuation in the population throughout the areas that were surveyed. So you're not going to have, that number in the conclusion relates to the overall average of the 30 square miles. So you may find a higher population in certain specific areas that would be higher than that number and could be lower than that number. So it just relates to the distance that the deer naturally move around and travel, which really isn't that great. So Aaron, maybe you could elaborate on that for us so Mr. Cross can have a little better understanding.
Sure. Yeah. And the report, the distance sampling report, provided a nice little heat map, so to speak. And that really, I felt like, illustrated nicely the difference between different areas of wildwood that have severe deer issues versus areas that have quite moderate deer issues. And so that's not unique to wildwood either. Every other city that I've worked with, that's part of what complicates this issue, is that you do have some areas of the city that have densities at 100 plus deer per square mile and are really experiencing true nuisance issues. And then you have other areas that are at quite tolerable levels. And so that further complicates the kind of social, I guess, aspect of this issue. That I'm sorry, I'm driving kids around, and so that further kind of complicates the social conflict involved with deer management. And so the distance sampling is not an exact science. The more, and I will say that also at the same time as saying that the police department and the Wildwood precincts have done a tremendous job. I mean, I am so impressed with the survey work they have done, both with actually doing the surveys as well as analyzing the data. So, major kudos to them for that. But distance sampling, as with any kind of wildlife population survey, it's just, there's going to be a wide confidence interval on that. And wildlife populations fluctuate naturally from year to year and generation to generation. And so trying to put an exact number on deer management is always going to be a struggle. So the numbers that you have to work with, though, are useful in that you have that confidence interval, and within 95% confidence that throughout the city, the range of the deer population is beyond what is recommended and what constitutes typically a nuisance situation, with certain areas of the city, as illustrated in that map provided by the police department and the planning department. You can see that some of those areas need more attention than others with regards to management. So I know this isn't an exact answer to the question, but that's kind of the nature of the problem. And some areas are going to require more attention than others. And that's largely due to the fact that there's a lot of areas of wildwood that the deer population is mostly managed through archery hunting and some firearms hunting, which has been successful in stabilizing that population over the last 2 decades. And then you've got other areas of the city that have developed more rapidly, and there's less opportunity for harvesting deer, and yet deer are still reproducing rapidly in those areas. And those are the areas that you're going to really see those those problems where there's not hunting opportunities available, and yet the deer population is growing and has grown and continues to grow rapidly.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the deer report?
I was
Yeah,
gonna,
Rick.
I was just gonna, maybe it's the engineer in me. I was just gonna point out, so I think the reference in the report might want to be double checked. In the conclusion, we're saying we're referencing the lower end of the confidence band, saying it's 53. I think that number should be 58. If I'm looking at the data further back in figure 18. So the overall for all regions ranges from 71.5 on the low end to 87.4 on the high end, or excuse me, 58.4 on the low end to 87.4 on the high end, and the average is 71.5.
I saw that as well. I think that's correct, Rick.
It might be better to state that more plainly in there as well, I think. If that's just my opinion. It's not a problem or anything.
Yeah, well, I'll make a note of that and we'll make sure that we get that updated.
Sometimes engineers are almost worse than accountants when you get down into.
Well, it's either one of the two, probably.
I mean, we bean counters take a lot of heat, but then there's the engineers. Holy cow. Just kidding there, Rick.
No, it's quite deserved sometimes.
Nah.
All right, thank you for that clarification. And for purposes of our draft plan, it's important that we have that number correct and refer to those averages when we're talking about our plan going forward. And I think it's very important to keep the perspective that Aaron provided is that goals are important, but that most probably the one we should be aiming at, no pun intended, is probably closer to 40. So, all right. Thank you much, Brad.
You're welcome.
Okay. Rick, here we go. Discussion and review of the draft plan. So, Aaron, did you have a chance to see it?
Yes, I did. Yes. And everything in there is kind of standard for what we recommend as far as a multifaceted approach to managing deer in suburban environments between harvest and damage control and education. Mm-hmm.
One area that we received a few questions about as we've gone back and forth on this is the utility of sterilization. And I've tried to do some research and reading on it, and I get varying opinions depending on the country, part of the country that it's tried in. But mostly what I keep centering down on is the fact that for that to work well, you have to have smaller populations. And then cost can vary widely. Can you speak from your experience to the utility of sterilization?
Sure. Yeah. So sterilization in deer, really the only method available right now for free-ranging deer is surgical sterilization of females. I know there has been some surgical sterilization of males on Staten Island, but that is an island population, and that's really a unique circumstance that doesn't apply to a location like Wildwood. So we do not, unfortunately, have fertility control in the form of a one-shot remotely delivered vaccine there has been a lot of research over the last 25 years into that technology, and maybe someday we will have it, but thus far it has been largely a failure. So the only true fertility control we have for free-ranging populations involves trapping, anesthetizing, and surgically sterilizing female deer through ovarectomies and tubal ligations. So that is what we did in the city of Town and Country, and it is successful in that deer have high survivability. The female deer have high survivability in that through that method, and they do not reproduce. It is not successful in the sense that you really have to be keeping or maintaining a sterilized portion of the population at about 60 to 70% of those reproducing females every year. So you're never going to be able to sterilize, all the females. And as you have more success with that method and sterilize more females, your cost goes up just because it's like becomes harder and harder to locate those untreated females. So the time in the field trapping and sterilizing them increases, which increases the cost. So in Town and Country, we did 130 female deer. This was over 10 years ago now, 2009, 2010. And I believe it cost around $1,200 per sterilized female. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that doesn't actually lower your population right away, because you're releasing those females back onto the landscape. So that really is the only method available, and it's just very expensive. The other question is whether or not let me take a step back. Any kind of fertility control in free-ranging native wildlife species in Missouri requires the authorization of the Department of Conservation director. And we explored this question a few years back with the city of Town and Country when they were considering potentially exploring that further. And our current director said that she would not approve and another round of fertility control with that same method, because we have learned what we have to learn about that, and there's nothing further to learn, and to authorize that would be misguiding a community that this was a logical or effective, cost-effective deer management method. And so I don't even know if you could get approval to do that if you pursued it. I believe you would not, but that said, the question hasn't been asked for probably 2 years or so.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
Sure.
That helps. Okay. Rick?
Well, I had presented the draft plan on the agenda tonight, and I wanted to point out that I did take some time to put in some modifications to the plan. Scott had an opportunity to look at it in advance, but I know that nobody else has necessarily. So if there's any comments, certainly on those revisions, would like to get that feedback, and we'll adjust it or make revisions as necessary. I did try to adjust the plan to reflect the count numbers and update it in that regard primarily. But I also put in some changes that were geared towards the discussion that we had at the February meeting relative to hunting and that kind of thing. So that was the mindset. The other thing that changed is Greensfield County Park is now being used for a managed hunt, and we changed that in the plan to reflect that is ongoing at this point in time. It wasn't when we initiated the plan, at least the first draft. So that's the, if you'd like me to, I'll be glad to go through each section and we can discuss it if you'd like, Marshall, or
Yeah, why don't we do that? So we make sure we're all on the same page.
so the introduction, if you've got it in front of you, we can start with the introduction just briefly. Again, the attempt here was to update the plan relative to the more recent 2020 count. So I reflected that we've done a count in 2018 and 2020. So I think hopefully that's fairly straightforward, address the change in the size of the count under the problem at the bottom of that first page. So, and I use the average number of the count being 71 and a half.
Okay.
And updated the area. So I didn't directly reflect the 2018 numbers in the plan. If that's a concern, we could certainly do that. Moving on, if there's no questions there, I'll just move to page 2. And after reading it with a fresh set of eyes, I just changed the survey. Instead of calling it a deer survey, I wanted to clarify it was a resident survey. We didn't survey the deer themselves, so I thought that should be a no-brainer. Moving on. I think the most substantive changes were back on, I guess, on page 5 and 6 relative to starting into the goals and objectives of the plan. And I guess specifically the changes start on page 6. So we had a lot of discussion at the February meeting relative to the combining of properties and what this committee felt was the correct way to approach that. Sergeant Wenling had a lot of comment there. So I tried to add in some of those bullet points relative to the combining of 3-acre properties to meet the 3-acre minimum requirement. So are there any comments relative to those changes maybe? I did point out that we would require or are recommending review and authorization by the Wildwood Precinct, that notice would be provided to adjacent property owners, and that proof of liability insurance would be required. I think all those things were discussed in February.
That is correct. The only question I had was whether, did we fall on the a decision about whether we wanted to cap the number of contiguous properties to, so you don't have 10 people getting, a small amount together, or do we want to cap the number of properties that can join together to form that 3-acre? Because I believe it was Town and Country, I think, that limits it to 4. Brad, do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
That may be Creve Coeur, I think.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah, I think.
I'm not so concerned about it, since that we're proposing that everything is reviewed and authorized by the police department, and that there is notice to property owners. I don't recall that there was a outcry for that sort of thing. I know we had discussed it. Does anyone have an opinion one way or the other?
When I reviewed the YouTube video, I didn't see a final recommendation to limit it. I know there was a lot of discussion about it.
Yeah.
Especially about the pros and cons. But certainly if that's the desire, we can add that in there at this point.
I was just curious if there was any, I don't have a particular desire to do that. I just remember we had a very robust discussion. I think we get there by, having the review and authorization idea. So I don't hear anyone having any other concern about that. So let's move on. Sorry to have slowed us down.
No problem. So if I move on, I'll reference further on that page 6, strategy 2, and this again was under the objective of reducing the deer population. Just added in a little clarity relative to the bullet point there: develop a program to match licensed hunters with interested private large lot property owners. Because that was the thought, would be to try to reach out to those larger tracts of land in Wildwood, where we could really make a difference with more hunting occurring. And then under that, there's 2 other sub points. Wildwood Precinct could check that hunters are licensed as required, and then identify and recruit key large lot landowners to participate in the program, mail postcards to these residents, and hold an annual meeting to discuss and promote deer hunting. I took out the reference to common ground properties. I didn't think that was a focus that we had talked about, so I felt like that was maybe presumptuous to even state it. And there probably be some concerns raised if we really wanted to go down that path. I don't think that's really our intent, to promote that or go that way with this. So I took that out. If there's any concern about that, let me know.
No, I don't think so. While we're on strategy 2, I know Jeff had said, he might not be able to make it, and if he does, he'll certainly be late. I'm just going to presume he's not going to make it tonight, but he had sent an email with a suggestion regarding the notion of doing maybe twice a year, what he's referring to as a baited seasonal hunt.
That would be a
strategy. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, that would be a question for Aaron to probably clarify if that's even possible before we even would make any type of recommendation like that.
Sure.
Yeah, that is a question that we had proposed to our regulations committee several times in the past. It has been voted down. So I do not believe we are going to, as a state, permit baited hunts. I'm sympathetic to the desire to use that as a tool, though. And with our current concerns about chronic wasting disease and whatnot, that it's unlikely that we're going to get anywhere with that question. So I don't think you should probably pursue that one.
That's fine. That's why I brought it up, because you're here.
Yep. Yeah.
Because I think, I think it's a suggestion that has merit, but and Brad, like you pointed, there's no point in going after it if we can't do it. So that's fine. Thank you both. Rick, sorry about that.
No problem. If you want to move forward real quick, I think I added another bullet point under that strategy. And this probably, it's a good thing Erin's here, because maybe she can provide feedback on it. It was work with MDC to request an expanded season for antlerless deer hunting in Wildwood. I know that was discussed at our last meeting, so I don't know if that's even a possibility or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. At this point, the archery potential for harvesting antlerless deer is essentially limitless in Wildwood. It would be the firearms permits, which are limited to 2 in any county. So I'm really not sure. That could definitely be something that we could propose to our regulations committee. Do you have a feel? We only collect harvest data at the county level. Do you have a feel for how many deer are harvested on firearms permits versus archery permits in Wildwood?
I don't think we have a clue, honestly.
Okay.
I don't. Nobody's really. We haven't tracked that or even tried to obtain that information. So
yeah, no, that's no problem. We don't have that information either, and at the state level, we just don't ever collect it because we're our only unit of measurement is county. So the reason why I ask is I'm not sure it would make that much of a difference, since if you look at the harvest data in St. Louis County, the folks that are harvesting more than 2 antlerless deer are doing so by archery, not by, well, they are limited, but that 2 deer limit is relatively new. We had very, very few firearms hunters that would harvest more than 2 antlerless deer on firearms permits prior to the change. And so I just don't know if it would result in any significant harvest that would make a difference. I do think that archery hunting is probably the most widely utilized tool in Wildwood, but again, that's anecdotal, so I don't have data to back that up.
So I guess, do we want to leave that in there in the plan for now?
I think so. Just given the idea that it's something we might be able to pursue, further with Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's probably worth leaving in at this point and knowing from my perspective and what I do, it's like, I want every tool to be on the table for communities to deal with urban deer population issues and harvest and utilize deer whenever, with whatever methods are, are possible and ethical. And so whether or not that makes a major dent in the population, is it a tool that we can have on the table? That's something that we can absolutely discuss as an agency, and it would go beyond Wildwood and kind of talk about urban counties having unlimited firearms, antlerless permits. And I think that's a worthwhile conversation for our agency to have.
Great, thank you.
All right, want me to go forward?
Strategy 3.
Yeah, just strategy 3, again, I think I referenced this. The first bullet point I took out because that is now happening.
Correct.
And then the second bullet point, I added it in because since it's occurring, we should support it. So that should be a pretty easy one. Going further down, that next bullet point, develop and recommend to manage hunts on city or private properties working with MDC. Now we had a direct reference further down in that bullet points underneath that statement about white buffalo, and I took that out, that reference out, because we have not been going that direction, it seemed to me, and I didn't feel like it really represented where the committee was going with the plan. But if you'd like it to remain in there, we can certainly do that. It seemed like the gist I was getting was we didn't want to recommend direct expenditures necessarily at this point in time for managed hunts.
Right. That's my recollection of where we were headed. I mean, certainly if we are questioned by council that, we have the information necessary if that's something they wish to pursue. But there is certainly a cost factor to that.
So that was my thinking when I read it. And frankly, that was kind of the same idea immediately below that on page 7. Again, I struck that whole paragraph talking about a sharpshooting program. And I guess it'd be the same thought. If that information is requested, we could provide it, but we didn't seem to want to head that direction for now. So why include it unnecessarily and raise concerns about going on that path?
Right.
I'd like to ask Erin if she might have any updated information on Town and Country's program, if they still are culling, or if they've reduced the amount that they're using that method, or if they've increased it.
Yeah. So because of COVID, Town and Country and Ellisville also uses bait and cull methods to manage deer. Both of them suspended their programs because of lack of budget in the last year. So they know that they're going to be having to kind of make up for lost time with regards to that effort in this coming season. And the intention as far as I know of Town and Country and Ellisville, is to continue with that when they have the funds to support it, which is hopefully this year. Town and Country, as you know, has used White Buffalo for the past, well, not including, of course, 2020, but let's see, 11 years, I believe. They have had a culling operation with White Buffalo, and it has been successful in that they have lowered their population from an average of 65 deer per square mile over 10 square miles to 28 deer per square mile. Now that was early 2020 would have been the 28 deer per square mile distance sampling event. So now they have skipped a year of management entirely, and they don't have any archery hunting to supplement. So that's something else to keep in mind, is that Wildwood has a significant amount of harvest that happens just through the local ordinance, and Town and Country does not. So the only harvest that is happening is through White Buffalo. And then, of course, mortality due to deer vehicle collisions is another major population kind of impact in Town and Country. Ellisville has utilized their own police department to bait and cull over the last 7 years, I believe. And it's just a very different method in that they have to do the operations essentially when they have time. And so they might harvest 10 to 12 deer, 10 to 15 deer a season over the last 7 years versus White Buffalo, which would harvest anywhere from 150 to 250 deer within 3 to 4 weeks. So it's a really different kind of operation, even though they are both under the same type of permit as far as bait and sharpshoot. So yes, as far as I know, they are both going to pursue that again in this coming season, now that they have hopefully revenue back in the city coffers, but I don't know that 100%. It is something that, I mean, in the future, if there are pockets of the city that really do not have other opportunities for harvest and are really struggling with nuisance problems, that while that is not, I understand the knee-jerk kind of reaction that it is really less palatable to people. It can be extremely efficient, and quite frankly, it's as humane as anything. The deer never really, they're eaten over a corn pile, and then they're dropped, and all that meat is donated to Operation Food Surge. So when you look at it objectively that way, and to residents that way, it becomes a little bit more useful in certain areas of the city that really don't have opportunities to harvest deer via archery or arms, and it's something for some of those more dense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you would prefer that we leave that out or don't agree, well, if you prefer that we leave it in, let me know. Otherwise, right now we struck the reference to that program.
No, I'm fine with that.
I think that's most of the changes. However, I would make one reference or one mention, and Aaron may have answered the question already for us. But one of the things that we state in the plan is that we're going to have a goal, and I think that we should be prepared to state what that is for those who ask. And so I guess that's what I would would suggest is that if, what is the goal that we want to work towards for deer population? Is it a density of 40 deer per square mile? Is that what we want to shoot for? Or maybe that's a bad choice of words.
That's perfect, actually.
Maybe perfect, I don't know. But we do reference that. It's one of the things in the plan that we're supposed to do. So
I would caution any specific number. I mean, maybe like a range, or under 40 deer per square mile, or no more than 50 deer per square mile, or something more of a range, because even just naturally the population is going to fluctuate year to year. And I wouldn't want your program to be viewed just as a success or failure based on, year to year, when really it should be viewed in a much longer term perspective of, is the trajectory towards the target? Are you staying within that range most of the time? So that's my 2 cents on that.
I'm curious, and maybe we're getting to this to find out what the end game is here, and a presentation to council or what we're shooting for. Are we looking to do, so Aaron just mentioned about a range. So let's just say, for sake of discussion, that we say, we're shooting for a target of under 50 deer per square mile. Are we going to be counting every year, or is this an every other year count? What's the frequency of this, to measure how we are doing against our goal?
You certainly do not have to count every year. If you are using more traditional means of management, like just regular deer harvest during the statewide seasons of archery and firearms, in fact, we don't require any counting at all. If you start to employ more efficient tactics like bait and sharpshoot, then you're probably going to want to have counts more frequently, perhaps every year that you have significant management with that method, in order to make sure that you're making progress towards your goal, and that your money is essentially being well spent in trying to meet that objective. But otherwise, there's no need to do annual counts. It might come down to how often residents really feel they want the counts, and maybe that's every 5 years, maybe that's every 7 years. But without any kind of specially permitted method, and by that I really just mean bait and sharpshoot. It's not necessary to do every year.
Thank you, Aaron. Sergeant Wendling, or Marshall, anybody here, what was the plan? We did this count. It was a pretty drawn out process. Wasn't overly expensive, overtime pay, that sort of thing. But what going into this, was it your plan to do it every year, or every other year, or every 5 years? What were you all thinking?
Well, we'll do whatever the city wants us to do, is my answer. But I think, like Aaron said, I think since we're focusing on just more general management and not really pursuing a culling program, I would think that probably every other year would probably be a good schedule to follow at this point. And then if we down the road see that we're still having issues in specific areas with really dense populations that are causing issues with vehicle crashes and nuisance type problems, then I think at that point, like Aaron referenced, we might need to consider doing some type of culling in real concentrated specific areas, because I don't think we're going to be able to address those issues in any other way if they don't respond to what our plan is currently. I think eventually, if you still have those overpopulated areas, that's definitely going to have to be something that's considered and implemented in order to have any impact on the population.
So yeah, I guess if depending on what the outcome is in terms of what this committee decides to what methodology we're going to adopt to thin the herd, and we have all these statistics. I guess we have statistics about auto crashes, but I guess some of them aren't reported. So I don't know if we have statistics that are comprehensive, complete, reliable about that. But obviously, if we have information and if we see those statistics going down empirically, then or even or better than that, we may not have to go to the expense of doing a count if we're seeing the numbers go down based on what we're doing. If that data is actually available in terms of, particularly, I guess, auto and deer strikes coming together, is that, and I guess that's at the end of the, or even doing another survey, which isn't all that expensive, but I don't know what kind of feedback you would get either through reports through the police department or through residents to determine whether we're being successful. What would be the main tool that we would measure that by?
Well, we track the number of deer crashes per year, and again, it's not an exact science, so there is some estimations that are made to come to the figures. But I think if we remain consistent in our methods for those for that information, then we'll be able to see if there is a trend overall. So I mean, generally, for the last 5 years, I mean, we've ranged from a low of 214 estimated crashes involving deer, and the high was 267. So, we're really averaging around 230-ish crashes probably every year. And if we see that go down over the next, I'd say 5 years, then we probably know that we've had some kind of an impact with the population, just with the methods that we're going to eventually adopt. But if there is no change, then I think we should probably consider some other methods, especially in the areas where we have a higher number of crashes. I mean, it's certainly the areas of greatest concern are the state routes. So Highway 100 and Highway 109 both have areas where there's a significant number of crashes every year. And I would think that down the road, if that doesn't change, that there should be some focus placed on culling in those areas just from a safety standpoint to eliminate the potential for injury to humans.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I never really conceived that this would be sort of a plan, and then 12 months later we do all this surveying again, because I think, as Aaron pointed out and others, the herd generally, they fluctuate over time, and I think to get a better idea of the size there, you have to give it time to go through a cycle or two. So if we're going to improve access to hunting and do some of these other things, be it a no feeding ordinance, et cetera, what does that look like? And if we do another deer survey, certainly I wouldn't do it before 2 years. But the traffic statistics, as Brad pointed out, that's something the city keeps normally. And that's something, if we were curious, we could take a peek at. The other thing to consider is, as population increases in this area, if you simply didn't see it increase over time, that may actually be, a very good sign, right? Because if you have more cars on the road, but you're not increasing the deer strikes, something here is working, right? So just something to keep in mind. It may not just be, gee, the number of deer strikes didn't go down. We may also need to look at, population growth, et cetera, to make a better good faith understanding of that.
Okay.
The other option, of course, is that if you're considering some additional management in say a certain quadrant of the city, you don't have to survey the entire city. You could just survey that one area, and your data is good, and your background data that you have already for reference, and so you don't necessarily have to do the full blown 30 square miles. That's a huge area to survey. You could just do those areas under consideration for that maybe you're considering for sharpshooting or something.
Yep.
So, Mr. Marshall, can I take it upon myself to revise that part of the plan to, there's some references to annually assessing the population. Maybe I can refine that a bit so it's not going to be implied that we're going to do an annual deer survey.
Yes. And to Steve's point, I think, the goal should be, that we wish to see the trajectory headed to somewhere below 50 or into the 4, if we want to be more, a little more nebulous, say in the 40s for an initial goal. And I think it's important to take note of what Aaron said earlier, that, this is that 40 number is the number that most people seem, socially seems to indicate that you've minimized conflicts with the deer, human animal conflict.
I sure hope.
I think that's a reason.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I was going to say, I think that's a reasonable, initial goal, is below 50 or in the 40s, or however you want to word it. I feel like that's probably attainable with some effort within the city, maybe some real concentrated effort in certain parts of the city, but I caution communities to go much lower than 30 deer per square mile, because I think that's practically unattainable without really serious effort year after year after year. And so, anyways, I think that's a reasonable goal.
I just hope the deer aren't getting together and talking and figuring out how many human beings they want to see in a square mile. I hope to God they're not doing the same thing.
Yeah, no kidding.
You never know. They all those clusters that you saw when you were around county, they could have been having meetings and saying, how do we get rid of those two-legged problem people?
Joke's on us.
Yeah.
So if it's all right, I'll take a shot at revising objective B there relative to the goal, maybe, and I can put that out to the committee if that's okay. And I'll just say the initial goal of less than 50 deer per square mile.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
So what's the plan from here?
Well, I'd like to see, let's get the changes that we've discussed tonight into the document. I think at that point, we could circulate the document amongst the subcommittee here, perhaps before our next public safety meeting. And then at that point, take the plan to the public safety group. And if we get consensus there, get it to council. Anyone disagree?
So what are the thoughts then in terms of what's everybody thinking in terms of trying to reduce the population? What kind of methodology are you thinking?
Not sure I'm tracking the question, given that the document is making certain recommendations in multiple different areas. One being, improving access to archery hunting, education, a no feed ordinance. So there's multiple pieces occurring at one time. Communicating the strategy to the community, right? So community engagement of some sort. And primarily there, and the thing that I think will be key will be the no feed ordinance, because I have neighbors that do, and I get it. You know, no one likes to see the animal suffering, particularly in winter. I get it. But if we're going to have an impact, I think we have to remind people, hey, we can't do that. And there's, you know, reasons to keep the herd healthy to do that as well. So it seems to me the strategy really is education, the no feed ordinance, and then improving access, greater access to hunting in the area. Those really are the key pieces to this plan. If that does not within a couple years, and obviously I think we will have to, you know, at some point measure up against that. If we don't see it going in the proper trajectory, then it may be time to, you know, reconvene and decide whether we want to, you know, pursue a program, maybe just in certain areas with a company to, you know, do the sharpshooting program.
So right now, as far as the hunting, it would be by bow. I guess firearms are allowed depending on if it's what, 3 acre minimum. Is that what we're talking about? And then I would assume that it's also limited to a certain type of a weapon or firearm.
Yeah, so firearms is basically restricted to areas west of 109.
Okay.
You can hunt by a shotgun or a muzzle loader east of 109. But center fire firearm hunting is only allowed west of 109.
3 acre minimum?
Yeah, 3 acre minimum everywhere. So I think one of our recommendations is to, you know, modify the hunting ordinance to allow for combining the parcels, individual parcels to meet a 3 acre minimum.
Did we decide how many, or are we still contemplating how many parcels can be combined to hit that 3 acre minimum?
I don't think we have a definitive answer to that. So I pulled up my memo and let's see here if I can find it.
It didn't seem that we were arriving at a consensus on that.
Yeah, so Ellisville and Manchester are the only two municipalities out of.
I'll throw something out and I'll say no more than 3. And that'll start the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I see that as something that the council probably and Mr. Young should probably iron out. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to make a recommendation personally because I don't feel it's my place as a police officer to really write the ordinance. So I think the idea of combining parcels is very important and should be pursued. But it's up to the city ultimately to decide what legislation they want to enact to regulate that.
So Rick, my thinking is, I mean, obviously the more parcels, the smaller the pieces of land are, and the closer the houses are together. So conceivably, if we said, no, say 3, no more than 3, conceivably that could be somebody sitting on 3 1 acre plots of land, let's say, because the whole thing is about, separation, is it not? So
there's already language in the existing ordinance that gives limitations on distance of discharging archery devices and firearms to buildings and things like that. So all that would stay in place. So okay. A lot of that does not apply if you are the property owner. You can hunt or shoot, within those distances if it's your property and your buildings. So, but the idea would be that if we do modify the ordinance, then those distances would stay intact for the adjoining properties that are not part of the combined parcels.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have an opinion?
Well, when we talked about this in great depth in February, the one key component of it that we were recommending was that to combine properties, they would have to get authorization through the Wildwood precinct. And so the Wildwood precinct would be involved in reviewing those properties that would be combined, and they would essentially be able to veto the request. So primarily that was the thought, that we would get the Wildwood precinct involved, and if they felt that the situation was not desirable, they would not approve it. But we didn't want to get too detailed at this point either, because this is just a plan. We'd have to move forward with that specific ordinance change. And that's really when those details would get worked on even more thoroughly and get hashed out. So I would expect there will be, regardless, a lot of discussion about that.
I think everybody's picturing like a subdivision where, oh, you know, in this subdivision, they're joining lots to come up with the 3 acres, and certainly those restrictions about you know, having population, having other buildings close by. You know, the purpose of hunting is not for somebody to be running through the subdivision, jumping fences, chasing after a deer. Obviously, that's going to be a bad idea, a bad situation. So, you know, it's more the open properties. And I can't picture where there would be, you know, a 1 acre lot or a 2 acre lot, you know, adjoining other 2 acre lots. Brad, can you think of anything? Usually they're larger lots to begin with, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think the really the idea here is that it's just going to enable hunting in areas where or currently we can't. And if you have neighbors in agreement that they want to allow hunting, then you have a small group of properties that can be combined, and then hunting can be conducted in a safe manner. And then all the involved property owners are aware that this is going to occur, and they can be involved on, you know, whatever level they wish to be. And obviously, if they don't want that to happen, they don't give consent. So then it doesn't happen on their property. So I think, as Aaron referenced earlier, it's important to be able to offer as many tools to the management techniques that we are looking for, just to have as many things available that is going to ultimately meet our desired goal of reducing the population. So I think if we get too narrow in scope and restrictive with this ordinance change, then I think we're going to eliminate potentially some areas that we really may want to be hunted. And I would hate to see that happen just because we decided to put a lot of language in an ordinance with restrictions. I think that everybody would have enough confidence in the police department's review of the actual physical site and proposed hunting areas, so we can ensure that there's a safe setup and backdrop and everything else. We can review the plans of the hunters on an individual basis and make sure that there's not going to be a likelihood of any type of accident or a person, you know, being injured by way of hunting. So I think it can all be managed well and in a safe way that is going to give us a positive result if residents choose to pursue that as an option.
And part of that too, and I don't think you
I don't want.
Let me say real quick, part of it was we were going to require property owners, we were going to give them notice, the adjacent property owners as well. So I don't know if we have ironed out the details exactly how that would work, but part of that process would be notification of the contiguous property owners that this hunt in the combination of the properties was being proposed.
I don't want to step in where I don't belong, but I just wanted to agree with Sergeant Wedling there that I mean he said it well as far as cooperation of landowners is really a benefit to achieving the objective. And so even if you have 4 landowners together who each have less than an acre, but they are all willing to cooperate, that's also an indication that the problem has grown severe enough that you are getting that kind of cooperation amongst homeowners in your community, that they're that motivated to harvest deer. So I get what you're saying as far as, I don't know if there are situations where you might have, say, 10 or 12 landowners that want to combine their properties, and perhaps that's problematic. But yeah, having the police be able to review those properties would narrow that, or be able to eliminate those potentially dangerous situations. And if it's a problem, you can place further restrictions on it in the future, I suppose, coming from somebody who's never held any kind of elected office. But I don't believe that any other community I've worked with has limited the number of landowners required to meet the acreage requirement. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that no one's put a limit on that, and it hasn't been a problem as far as I'm aware.
Thank you.
Good to know. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, concerns? So we need to go over the remaining objectives. That's again, it's the education, communication, and public engagement. We didn't make any changes to that since the last meeting.
No, I didn't make any changes to it, but certainly if you have any in mind, or you want to go through these real quick.
I just didn't know if anyone had any questions about that going forward. Okay. Good deal. All right. So, Rick, if you want to take a stab at those changes and additions.
Yes, sir. I will be glad to do that, and I'll forward you another revised version.
Okay, very good.
Here within a few days.
Perfect. And maybe we can circulate it to the subcommittee, get feedback, and perhaps if we're lucky, we can put this on the agenda for our public safety committee meeting.
So June 10th is the next public safety meeting, if I'm looking it up correctly.
Okay. Is that going to give you enough time?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Works for me. Any other questions or concerns on the document? Nope. Okay. All right, so the last item on the agenda is next meeting date. So with the goal in mind of getting this to the Public Safety Committee for June 10th, I think we'll leave that empty for now. We may not need it. We'll see what happens with the Public Safety Committee. If we have to reconvene, we can do so after that. Anyone have any objection to that? I know Brad loves these meetings.
I do.
I think Steve Cross is going to be a new regular.
Well, I won't at the June 10th. I'll be in Florida on that one, so I'll miss that meeting. But
Zoom works everywhere.
But I'm here to advocate for the deer. So hey, it's the John Denver song. How do you know that the animals don't talk just because they haven't talked to you? I mean,
True enough.
You're not gonna file a lawsuit, are you?
No.
Injunction?
We got enough Wildwood residents that do those kinds of things.
Okay.
I'd like to thank Erin, though. She's always a great help, and really appreciate her joining us and taking the time out to help us. She's helped us for several years now, and she's just a tremendous resource for us. So I really appreciate that.
Yes, it's been a tremendous help, Aaron. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm happy to work with Wildwood, and I know it's a complex issue and you're never going to make everybody happy, and that makes it tougher. So however I can be of assistance, I'm happy to. Thanks for including me on the conversation.
We appreciate you taking the time.
I will tell you,
Having volunteered like that.
it's absolutely impossible if you were to close your eyes and not see the name to know if it was Aaron talking or Michelle talking. Those two
Oh,
sound,
really? That is funny.
you two sound virtually identical. Your voices, absolutely
Oh,
identical.
that's really funny.
I mean, seriously, if you listen to, I mean, Michelle, are your lips moving? Because I think that was you talking just now.
I've been muted this whole time.
I was like, now
incredible.
I want to hear her voice.
Exactly.
Does anybody else
Thanks.
see that, hear the resemblance between those two?
I think there is some.
Yeah.
There is some, yeah. I don't know if it's huge, but there is some, yep.
Well, I don't know about that, Aaron, but thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
And we appreciate it, Aaron.
All right. With that, thank you everybody for your time this evening. You know, in the end, I think, you know, I know we're doing the right thing for the community. So I appreciate everybody's input. And Rick, thank you for all the work that you do around this.
Oh, no problem.
Over and above.
No problem.
Rick, would you hang on after this? I want to ask you a quick question, please.
Okay, sure thing.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Meeting is adjourned.
All right. Good to see everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.